Good afternoon, everyone. Really appreciate everyone tuning in today. I don't know how it is where you are, but it is blisteringly, absolutely hot outside. So I'm thankful to be inside in the air conditioning on this call today. If you do not know me, my name is Brock Kerchner. I am now the president of the Conrail Historical Society. Although I may be new to you, I'm certainly not new to the society. I'm actually wearing the first ever shirt that the Conrail Historical Society ever produced back almost 15 years ago. I was member number 9 and was on the board for many, many years before declining a nomination to continue to just focus on my family and business and so forth. In that time period, I have been on the board of directors for many different nonprofits, helped to run. Personally, I work for iHeartMedia for the last 20 years. For the last 6 years, I've been a presenter for Operation Lifesaver of Pennsylvania. For the last 3 years, I've been the state coordinator for Operation Lifesaver of Pennsylvania. So bringing my passion for Conrail and some of the knowledge and expertise that I have throughout the railroad industry back to continue to lead this society to a great future. I want to first thank the board of directors and those that have worked very hard among the membership as well to get the society in the best shape it's ever been in its existence at this point in really truly every area. So we're going to have a board of directors meeting in about 2 weeks. I've asked the board of directors to really think about their views on the vision of the society, and then we're going to get to work. So there's a lot of amazing things on the horizon. Rudy's going to follow up on some of those things, and Rudy's not going anywhere. So don't worry. He's kept lock and key in his home working for us. So don't worry about that. I do want to say upcoming, our fourth quarter meeting, which is typically November 6th for this year, we are going to look at doing a in-person and a hybrid virtual situation. In the last year and a half, there's way too many of us, that are being able to join this meeting virtually. And by going back to an in-person meeting, we don't want to make sure that we can do this both ways. So one of the things we're going to talk about at the board meeting is how to do that, that people online can hear people in person and vice versa, and presentations can happen both ways as well. So we'll get back to you on how we're going to do that once we can get that all squared away. Next year as well, hopefully things continue to move in a good direction with the state of the country in regards to COVID, and we continue to open up and get things rolling back to normal. So we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll see what happens. So thank you once again for joining. We appreciate your support, and I'll let Rudy hit some of the updates that we have for you.
Sure. First thing we've got is our membership report from our secretary and membership chairman, Carolyn.
Hi. There I am. Okay, I'm unmuted. So here's our usual membership map that Rudy's been putting together for us the last few meetings. It's, we've said this every time, it's very heavily concentrated in the Northeast, but we're seeing this spread out a lot, which is great. And again, like Brock said, the virtual meetings, I think, have reached a lot more people too, which is good for retention, but I think it's also good for bringing in a lot of new people. And also we're finding that sending these reminders out, by the way, got us an email this morning from a member in Massachusetts who has things to donate. So communication's been helpful too. At the moment, we have 436 current members, which is awesome. I think it's a little up from last year, right? You have the numbers.
Yeah, we're up about 20 from last year.
That's what I thought about. So I think we were at 417 last year. We're like 19 over last year. With 129 sustaining members. Rudy's running out of space on the sustainers page in the quarterly now because he actually told me he reduced the font size the other day because we've got so many.
Make him add another page for sustaining. Keep going, guys.
Take it full page now because it's only part of the page. To that end, we actually sold out of calendars. We took them off of the website the other day. We had one sustainer join last night after we took them off. He knew there were no calendars left, but joined anyhow. So next year we'll probably have to order some more calendars than we did even this year. So.
And we ordered extras this year too.
Yes, we did.
Went back to a second order this year.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Didn't seem any need to reorder calendars in July, so we're not going to bother. But yeah, so all good. I think we're seeing a lot of people coming back after quite a few years, which is great. I'm glad to see that the society has gotten a very positive name for itself again the last few years. That's bringing back some members that we haven't seen in a while, which is really cool because we keep spreadsheets of basically every membership spreadsheet we could find. We mushed together at one point, and I think we go back to 2013 with the old membership spreadsheets. So we've got people coming back that haven't been members since 2013, 2014, 2015. So we're very happy to see people coming back. That's about it for me.
Cool. Next thing, real quick. Unfortunately, not a whole lot of progress in the boxcar. If anyone knows how to make it stop raining for more than a day at a time, that'd be great. We're still dealing with the issue of we need to cross a field that is a soccer field to get our boxcar to where it needs to be. And as long as the ground is at all wet, we're afraid that the boxcar and the heavy equipment needed to move it will sink into the mud. So we've kind of hit a standstill here at the moment until weather decides to cooperate. We're hoping that if things start to dry out later in the summer, we'll be able to move it then. But that's really kind of where we're at the moment. Brock, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, it's been it's super hot during the day, and then every evening we get a massive set of storms that comes through. It's if it's not every day, it's every other day. So it's been a little frustrating because a lot of the water for the area flows through the field that we need to get to. So it's not just the fact that we need to wait for that to dry out. It's the fact that a lot of the water gets funneled towards that field that we need to get through. So it takes it even longer for that to dry out. So a little bit of a waiting game, but it is ready to roll to its permanent location. So we'll just wait on Mother Nature here for a little bit.
So a related project is our archives, which in this image is on the left side of the boxcar. It's going to be in the boxcar eventually. We've made some progress on that recently. We've established a new storage unit in Shippensburg. We can start kind of staging some stuff, getting it moved to Shippensburg that's going to go in the boxcar. We can start sorting some things that are not going to go in the boxcar that are going to stay in some kind of storage. We've also taken in two pretty significant donations recently. I see John McLaughlin is on this call. He has done a stellar job of working through over 700 drawings that were donated to us by the Pennsylvania Railroad Technical and Historical Society. And the one pictured here is actually the lettering diagram for our boxcar. Is the original diagram from Conrail that the Pensy guys donated to us. We are actually sending this out to get scanned. Because there's also some data information that we got with it. There's like even a little plate F placard on the car. We got the original diagrams for that. So that's going to go out. The other donation we got was from one of our members, Don Altman, who's donated a bunch of maps and also a couple of locomotive lettering diagrams. I've pictured one of them here. That's Conrail related, the Ann Arbor engine here. So we'll get some of that stuff scanned as well. eventually we'll be able to do this kind of stuff on our own. One of the things we did about, Jesus, got about 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago now, roughly, was we did a fundraiser for the archives to get a large format roll scanner. So once we have them established in the boxcar, we do already have money set aside to purchase scanning equipment to do this kind of stuff ourselves. But for the moment, we've got some volunteers and some donations that'll be able to get this done for us in the meantime. John, I don't know if you want to talk at all about that Pensy collection that came in, because there's some pretty incredible stuff in there just from the stuff that you sent to me. So.
Yeah, it was just really a fortuitous opportunity. I was at the PRR Association's archives in Lewistown, Pennsylvania, and they were bemoaning the fact that they had all these drawings that were of Conrail lineage that they wanted to get rid of because they were in the way. So I said, well, if you're offering, I'm taking, and put them in the back of the car. And it wound up being something like 1,280 individual drawings, most of which are very small components of a car, like a side interior side post, or a redesign of a corner post for a car, or draft gear, trucks, that sort of thing. Even one of the more arcane items was a drawing, a full-size mechanical drawing of a hammer that was supposed to be standard equipment in Conrail cabooses. So it's a real cool opportunity to get a snapshot into all kinds of different mechanical aspects of Conrail. It was fun. I'm going to turn over the balance of the material to Brock on Monday, so he can look through the 20-some rolls of material that pertain to the office car equipment, and the balance of the stuff he's going to take down to the storage unit down at Shippensburg. So it's been preliminarily organized in just very basic groups, freight cars, maintenance away, OCS, other passenger stuff, locomotives, a lot of wiring diagrams, includes reference to some of the E33s and E44s that Conrail had. So it's a neat treasure trove. We ought to all be very grateful that the PRR Technical and Historical Society was conscientious enough to hold on to this stuff until they had an opportunity to donate it to us.
Yeah, John was in the right place at the right time, because we literally the week prior were talking with them about some items that they had to donate, and then he sends us an email and says, "Hey, I'm here," and they're looking to get rid of this stuff. So perfect timing, perfect place, and as they sort through a lot of what they have, there will be more coming.
Yes.
So hopefully it is going to be wonderful pieces like what we have received in this donation.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
So obviously, if you're not new in the past couple of weeks, you've seen the emails that went out about the whole eBay scam thing that we were a victim of. I am happy to report that as of Thursday this week, we have won one of the 3 disputes. So they are reading our narrative descriptions of what happened, and the fact we were able to track all it down has been working in our favor. So the other two transactions are still pending, and we have not had any more of them since we started shutting all this stuff down. Also, in communicating with a lot of the other dealers in the hobby, we found quite a few other ones that were hit either just before we were, or some of them that were able to catch it because of our notifications. So if nothing else, hopefully we'll be able to not lose any money on this, and we've gained some pretty good goodwill in the railroad hobby as far as being able to alert everybody to what was going on, and save a lot of our peers in the preservation industry from the same heartache we went through. Otherwise, the only other notes in the shop are, as Carolyn mentioned earlier, we are out of 2021 calendars as of yesterday. We saw the last one yesterday. So Not that I necessarily understand why people are buying 2021 calendars in July, but somebody bought one, so I'm not going to argue it. So that was the last one. So we're not going to be reprinting them obviously in July. Any sustaining members that do join from this point forward will not be getting a calendar because we don't have any left. That's about it for the shop. So the next item we had here is our new speeder. We mentioned this in our May meeting. One of our directors, John Gouldy, is driving up to Michigan, I think as we speak. And he's going to be picking this up on Tuesday. He'll be bringing it back to Pennsylvania with him. And we also acquired a trailer to go with it from the owner. So we'll be in an enclosed trailer. It is an operational M9G speeder. And we're still working on exactly what we're going to do with it, but the opportunity was there and we have a place to put it for the moment. So John's going to hang on to it in his driveway and we'll figure it out from there. This is our new speeder that was graciously donated to us by its longtime owner. And we hope to be able to get it out and run a little bit somewhere sometime in the near future. So otherwise, the rest of our equipment is really unchanged from our meeting in May. 165 has been used somewhat on the ANA. Their season this year has been a little bit weird because of ever-changing COVID restrictions and what they can do, and as far as state mandates and also FRA mandates have been constantly changing over this year. So they have run it a little bit, but it hasn't seen a whole lot of use yet. The 22-130 is still up in, it's currently stored in Hawley, kind of waiting for its time in the shop. They got a bunch of shop work lined up on the Sturbridge line, so it'll go in at some point. FlexiFlow is, it had just gotten to Danbury in April. They really haven't done a whole lot with it yet, but we've been talking to them a little bit about, their plans for restoring it and how we can help with that. Part of their delay on that too is they just had their big reopening after being closed for about a year and a half. They just opened back up on July 4th weekend, so they've been trying to get the museum back in swing. The 8905 has seen some use down in Baltimore. It's basically they sell their shop switcher, so every time they got to move something around on the property, that thing comes out of hiding. They've been keeping it in the shop building off site up the track a little bit. It's so they can keep it. It was described as garage kept. So the paint job still looks pristine on it 2 years later. But unfortunately, that means it's not often visible to the public unless you happen to be there on a day that they're switching stuff around in the museum. And our road railer, it's still sitting on Weatherly. Friend of the society has generously donated the use of his property to store it on indefinitely. But we are looking at opportunities to be able to display that trailer somewhere as a historic artifact. It does have one of the bogies wheels inside of it, trucks rather, I'm sorry. So we need to find a way to display that somewhere, probably not on live rail, but somewhere that someone can, appreciate it and it's not in a field somewhere. One last piece of equipment that's worth bringing up. This is fairly recent. The Cincinnati Scenic Railway just rolled this out. It was done by the Midwest Preservation Society in Cleveland. This is actually a former Illinois Central GP10. It would have been rebuilt in Paducah right alongside the Conrail engines. The only major difference is the location of the headlight. It's not up between the number boards, it's on the nose. But they run on our next Conrail branch line, and they had the opportunity to acquire this locomotive, and they decided they wanted to try to paint it to represent the engines that would have run on that branch line originally and kind of preserve the Conrail history in that area. So they came to us about December or so for the artwork and the proper paint colors and everything else, try to get the engine as close as possible as they could. They numbered it into a number slot that was not used on Conrail on purpose. It was right in the middle of the Paducah Jeeps that were redone for Conrail, but this number slot was never used. We got permission from Conrail Shared Assets to use the logos and everything on an operating locomotive. So they anticipate this engine entering entering a tourist service sometime. I believe they're talking about this fall or even late summer. So this is a neat thing in Conrail preservation. It's not originally a Conrail engine, but it is a neat way to represent Conrail on an original Conrail branch line. What else? Finally, the Conrail Quarterly. I believe everybody should have them unless you've joined in the past week or so. If you joined in the past week, they are in the mail. Everything we had left that hadn't gone out yet went out yesterday. So if you're waiting on a quarterly, it's either in the mail or you've got it already. All the digital ones also went out this week. So if you have not received your quarterly and you didn't join in the past week, let us know. Could be stuck in the mail somewhere, or it could have gotten lost. We had at least one member that reached out to us. The post office left it outside in his porch in the rain, so we replaced that one for him. So if you have any issues, reach out to us and we'll get you sorted out. I think that's about it for announcements, unless you got anything else, Brock. And then you're up next.
Rudy, did
Yeah.
you mention that Shared Assets owns like the Conrail trademarks? Is that what I think I heard you say?
Yes. So Shared Assets not only owns the Conrail trademarks, they own the trademark for every predecessor railroad except for Penn Central. Penn State, New York Central, Erie, Lackawanna, EL, Lehigh Valley, Reading, CNJ, they're all owned by Shared Assets. So anytime any of those trademarks are used in any application, it legally needs to go through Shared Assets.
Cool, thank you.
We have permission. We actually have a really nice blanket agreement with Shared Assets to use the trademarks. That was done originally about a decade ago. And in late 2017, we actually re-upped it and it made it a little bit more blanket. So we actually have a signed agreement with Conrail to use the Conrail logo basically for anything related to preservation, including, if we wanted to put out Conrail branded products or anything like that, we are legally able to do that, but that's because we have an agreement to do so. Everybody else, from model manufacturers to museums to tourist railroads to whatever, would need to have their own agreement with Shared Assets to do that.
Cool, thank you for the detail, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Hey, Rudy, real quick question. What's the deadline to submit photographs for the 2022 calendar?
We typically try to put that together in early October, so I'd say probably end of September would be photo submissions. We've been really good about getting that calendar to print in the first couple weeks of October, so that it's out, by about Halloween or so. So yeah, I'd say probably end of September would be good.
Thank you.
Photo submissions. Mm-hmm.
No, I will say our licensing, if you want to call it that, agreement with Shared Assets has been fantastic from day one.
Mm-hmm.
They've even given us, the opportunity to Conrail specific magazines or whatever to reprint articles and all those sorts of things. They've been absolutely fantastic, from a legal standpoint. And even for myself personally, they allowed me to put the Conrail logos back on my high rail vehicle. The only thing I had to do was cover them when I was actually driving it. And I did that with magnets. But, obviously there's liability there when you're driving a vehicle and it has, another trademark on it. So they've been absolutely wonderful. So that relationship with Shared Assets is incredibly strong. And I had a conversation probably about 6 weeks ago with Eric Levin there, and we're excited for the future for both sides. And obviously the donations that they have given to us directly from their employees has been remarkable and continued year after year. So good thing to see.
One of the reasons we needed to order more calendars, because we ran out we actually ran out of calendars in like February. And one of the reasons we had to order more was because Conrail straight out just ordered a whole buttload of them. They ordered a ton of calendars from us. So they are ostensibly all over Mount Laurel at the moment. So if anyone else, unless anyone else has anything else regarding our announcements or anything society business wise, Brock, you're up next.
All right, sounds good. If you haven't heard, I don't know how you couldn't have heard yet, but Wes Reminder and myself are finishing up a combined 30-year project on writing a book on the Conrail business and research trains, the special equipment. This includes the track measurement train. This includes the office car train. This also includes the laboratory cars and so forth as well. We handed over more than half of the book last night to our publisher, and we were extremely excited to do that. Wes is not here because he is actually continuing to write captions for the book today. If I ever dream about doing another book, all you have to do is just say the word captions and I'll stop right there. I never ever dreamed how tough it was to write captions for a book, because you're literally trying to say the same thing about the same subject over and over and over and find 700 different ways to say it.
Thank you very much. I said the same thing.
Yeah, kudos to anyone who's ever written captions for a book. You're a saint and an angel. But we continuing it just, there's stuff coming out of the woodwork everywhere. It's delayed what we had hoped to have the book over to Rudy here 2 weeks ago, but it's good. It's good that new stuff continues to fall into our laps. We understand that at some point you just have to cut bait and run and get it done. So for the future after the book, there's not going to be a volume number 2. There's not going to be an update printed, that kind of thing. But Wes's website is really going to be where we end up posting any types of further updates that we have past the book. But so you can order the book at cr-ocs.com. Wes and I are donating all of our royalties as authors to the society. So we're not taking a dime from this. This is a labor of love. This is, for he and I, this is going to be some of our life's legacy. It's been an honor to talk and really tell the stories of the men and women that worked on this train, used this train, were part of building this train. I think 3 weeks ago, Wes and I were in the Reading passenger car shops at Reading Yard, which, if you know the story of the train, that's where a number of the cars were refurbished or built from scratch. The theater car was really birthed there after pretty much gutting a Via diner. And that's where the train stayed for many years before it was moved altogether up to Altoona. First half of the book is really the story of the trains themselves from 76 to 99. Second half of the book is the one-on-one interviews that we've done. I think we've cataloged over 80 hours of interviews with people, recorded time, I should say. Obviously, there's a lot more than that unrecorded, but there's a lot of really neat information in that, because we wanted to show the personality of these cars. We wanted to show the work that was being done. And then the last third of the book is the details, car by car specs from their build date all the way to present day. So you can see where they are now, where they came from previously. And I mean, diagrams, above, inside, underneath. You're going to have pretty much everything you could possibly think of, and probably more than what you ever wanted to know about the special equipment fleet for Conrail. One of the things for me personally that I've really been happy with, that I did not expect writing this book, was all the tracker measurement team, the laboratory team. They never really get the limelight. They never really get the public view of what they did for Conrail, and we get to tell their stories. And I'm really thankful that we do that, because you will hear me say it a million times. The legacy of Conrail is not just the metal. It's the people. Conrail was such a family. From, you know, you look at the melting pot of all of these railroads in '76 to what Conrail became, a leader in the industry, someone in the industry who pushed the envelope and innovated. And those are the stories that need saved and told for history's sake, just as much as the equipment and so forth. So I'm really, really excited that this book brings to light a section of Conrail that hasn't really seen the light of day before. So if you have any questions, concerns, you can always email Wes and myself. It's really easy to remember. It's ocs@thecrhs.org. But we are finishing up things here very quickly. So if you have something that you feel could be of use, get it to us right away, because we're hoping to get everything completely over to Rudy here shortly. I'm still expecting probably late October that these start to ship out, but we will have to see what happens in regards to us finishing up the layout. So really appreciate everyone's help. There's been a lot of people on this call that have ordered books. Their support, have given us their time in talking about things with the train. But you will see tons of inside photographs you've never seen before. A lot of interiors, a lot of artifacts, those sorts of things that the public didn't get to see with this train, besides watching the train go by and going, what the heck did I just see? You know, what was that magnificent train that just passed by? So that's about it.
Cool. Anyone else have anything else society related news wise? I've been watching the chat here. I'm trying to respond to some questions here in the chat that we got. No one else has anything else? I'm going to unmute Jim here and ask Jim to unmute himself. And we will commence our first presentation, which is, let's see if we can get Jim to unmute. So there we go. Jim is unmuted. All right, our first presenter is Jim Blaze. We pull up your PowerPoint here. You should be good to go.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure as an I think of myself as an ex-con. That's usually I still am engaged in journalism and some consulting. And the first question I'm going to have, so I usually identify myself as an ex-Conrailer with pride. Can you all hear me? Is the first question.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes.
good. All right. So I'm going to give you some tidbits from my direct career experience. So every one of these slides I've crafted myself, and usually the slides you're going to see that are images or buried tables at some point or other, they were originally prepared by me or for me or with some other Conrail people to give to a presentation. So my theme is, did you know? Or if you're in your 78th year like me, do you remember? So if we go to the next slide, next slide should basically just say, okay, my history of where I was.
Hang on one second, Jim.
That's okay.
Next slide here.
So I spent, before Conrail, I was with the Chicago Area Transportation Study, so I was a state of Illinois DOT employee, and I was actually involved in trucking and mass transportation as well as railways, and they needed somebody to do a freight railway study because all of a sudden they saw during my 7 years there that there was a bankruptcy proceeding going underway involving somebody called Penn Central. They didn't know anything about it. So I was chosen. So I joined Conrail in 1975. I was actually one of the first 15 employees hired during the activation period, and I left Conrail in 1996, so roughly 21 years. I then worked as a consultant for Norfolk Southern in the Conrail split. I spent then after that, I spent 17 years working for a company known as Zetatech Associates here in Southern New Jersey. They're an international research engineering company. So I learned an awful lot about civil engineering side to go along with my formal economics training. And I did a lot of my work. I'm going to say somewhere around 2/3 of my work was done overseas. So I've been everywhere, man, from Mongolia to South Africa to Russia to whatever. And today, well, I'm kind of relaxed. I'm a journalist for Railway Age, a contributing engineer. Contributing engineer. Somebody asked me, what does contributing mean? And I said, well, that means I write for nothing. Oh, you don't get paid. That's about it. Yeah. But I do get some gigs like expert witness testimonies. So if we go on to so that's my background. And if we go on to the next slide, one of the things I'd like to get to share with you coming out of this, if you were to ask me what do you want me to remember, Jim, 3 days from now after this talk? Well, I'd like you to remember that there are some lessons learned from Conrail's history, both its failures and its troubles and challenges, as well as its successes. But I'd also like you to remember that basically the most difficult part about doing future planning, if you think about, what's the success going to be of the Kansas City Southern merger? Is Kansas City Southern going to be bought by CP, or is it going to be bought by Canadian National? And if so, are they going to be as successful as all of the paperwork that's been published in the newspapers about them? My lesson from my history and from Conrail specifically is, well, don't put a whole lot of faith in all your retirement funds into backing what is published as the future plan, because a lot of the stuff that's being talked about is hypothesis, as yet unproven by evidence. So keep that in mind. I think the Conrail story reflects how its leaders decided to take some risk and change flawed plans. And that's one of the takeaways I would like to leave with you, that things didn't go according to how USRA had projected they would. So if we just go on to the next slide, beginning with the United States Railway Association, they created the final system plan, and that work started in late 1974 and continued through most of 1975. The final system plan was presented to Congress as a document in the late summer of 1975. And of course, Conrail didn't take over operations until April Fool's Day of 1976. So there was a lot of stuff that had to happen to activate this plan. But the one thing I'm going to point out is in this first paragraph here, Conrail was supposed to grow to some 400 annual million tons of freight. Didn't happen. The key to Conrail's success is we had to learn to live with the fact that we were only getting about half of the freight that we were supposed to get. A lot of people don't remember that. That was a real struggle. The next slide is simply a table which you can look at your leisure later on. I don't propose to take you through this, but the 1981 forecast was the plan said we were supposed to be at 411 million tons. And depending on what you counted, we were somewhere between 195 million to 219 million. When I created this slide for a presentation I was going to give in Russia, 8 years later after the slide was presented, I used 219 as the number, but there were numbers that were as low as 195. It depended on what we were counting. And so we go to the next slide. The flaws in the plan, basically, I'll just draw your attention to the line for 1981, 1980. We were supposed to have freight revenue in the third column over of roughly $4.5 billion. The actual revenue we had was 3.6. So obviously, we had to scramble in the early years between 1976 and 1981 going forward to figure out, well, what we're going to do, because this plan isn't working out. So if we go to the next slide, got a typo in it for spelling rail the first time. But for rail-to-rail competition, the preferred staff recommendation was that Conrail would not be created out of all of the assets that whatever percentage of the assets were going to be conveyed to Conrail. We weren't going to get them all. C&O, B&O, and Norfolk Western, a few other Class 1 railroads were going to get significant parts of the Conrail. That those companies decided, too risky, and they backed out. So substitution competition was at the last minute created for the Delaware and Hudson Railroad. And they were going to be the competition, shadow competition for Conrail. I use the term shadow, not out of disrespect, but out of realism that, look, they just didn't have enough critical mass of origin, destination, and switching. They had to rely on reciprocal switching by Conrail in order to get traffic that was either at the port of New York, New Jersey, or northern New Jersey, where they had access, or Philadelphia, where they had access. And they had to rely on trackage rights. And there were a whole number of reasons why they just didn't have the critical mass to be a first-class service and compete with Conrail. As our service got better and better, they basically were a weak second choice. And actually, they were a weak third choice, because first choice in our markets was still the semi-trailers out on the highway. So this should be a warning to today's Surface Transportation Board, the NIT League, and other things that said others seeking in the years 2021 to 2022 and 2023 to have competitive solutions and trackage rights agreements as an offset for the Kansas City merger, or for things that are going to happen in New England, or for something that might happen with a future transcontinental merger. Surface Transportation Board really has to, I think, in my opinion, use this lesson of the Conrail history, walk away and say, hey, we need to understand really where the supply chain is actually going to get a benefit from any of these competitive solutions we offer in these merger cases, and where it's just a hope and a prayer and it may crash and burn, and not give you the kind of robust competition as was the illustration of Delaware and Hudson. Now, I want to make sure that I leave for the record, since we're recording this. Look, the Delaware and Hudson people, in my opinion, did a yeoman's job of trying to compete. The failure to reach critical mass was not because they didn't try. It's simply, well, there were some physical and engineering and physical limitations that just didn't allow them to be as competitive as USRA had hoped they would be when we put them into play. So if you would go to the next slide. So the plan was put into place. I was one of the lucky people hired to be one of a group of maybe approximately, that's what that little wiggly thing says near the 80, approximately 80 people working on the second floor of 1818 Market Street to put together the activation, the day one operation. A few of us that worked on the final system plan at USRA were given this opportunity to hire on at Conrail for just two reasons. First of all, we knew where the skeletons were in the plan. And we had some capability, therefore, intellectually and filling in the data holes as Conrail was going to go forward to execute the plan. So that's why some of us were given an opportunity. But out of the 80, I would say most of the people were either private consultants, not affiliated with any of the bankrupt railroads. And in other cases, they were key people with executive and operating and marketing and pricing and costing experience from the bank, each of the 7 bankrupt unreorganizable railroad companies, who also volunteered to get transferred to USRA and hire on as part of the activation team. So the credits and kudos to all the people that basically worked there, because this was not an 8 to 5 job, trust me. And it went on for a lot of months. So yeah, so next slide is the early years. Never believe never believe anyone or anything claiming to be final in a plan. Flaws in the USRA plan included the fact that there was an awful lot of cars that were such a bad order state that they were, as the terminology I believe was white line. That is mean they're ready for the scrap market as soon as the scrap price is right. Track and bridge physical conditions along particularly the main lines have been understated during the USRA systems, field systems that we went out and did studies of, and relative to the expected operating train speeds on the main lines that we wanted to maintain. So and then the customer retention and the recapture marketing assessment targets that USRA had said that we should expect, they were obviously bad. Well, if you got these physical problems that are going to require a lot of CapEx and fixing, and you got a marketing volume recapture rate that's going to be wrong, then obviously your operating ratios is, in today's terminology, is not going to be very good. And our operating ratio was well over 100, which, as you know, is bad news. And since today's targets are in the 60 to 55 range. But I want to point out that paradoxically, what I found out in my 20-year plus career after I left Conrail and went into international consulting is all the projects I started to look at and work at or do benchmarking studies at for clients, they all had this flaw. They all overestimated the physical condition of the property. They all underestimated basically how much it was going to take to get the traffic up to their benchmark operating performance levels that were in their pro forma, what's called pro forma financial plans and numbers. And they basically all overestimated the amount of volume they were going to get, and therefore volume times revenue per car or car mile, they were overestimating the amount of revenue. So there are all kinds of flaws. This was not unique to the Conrail situation and USRA. In fact, did you know that if you bought shares in the massive, superbly engineered project for the Channel Tunnel between the UK and France, you lost your money because it went bankrupt within the first 8 years. Not only did that, but if you were a bondholder who bought the bonds for the first project, and then you at the first bankruptcy, you were converted to a shareholder, wait, you lost out again a second time because it basically was reorganized a second time. Why? Because they failed to estimate that the ferry boat operators who were going to compete with the Channel Tunnel for freight operations bought bigger boats, thus reducing their unit costs, thus offering price competition, thus getting a lot of the market share that was supposed to go through the Channel Tunnel on trains. I have seen this repeat throughout my career, that project managers never seem to get this part of the planning part right. So looking back on the USRA final system plan in the early Conrail years, I'm not expecting, I guess I'm not really surprised looking back that, okay, we fumbled the ball and had the same thing go wrong too. But the important thing is we recovered. So if we go on to the next slide, I think what we needed to do was we needed to say, okay, so there's flaws out here. What we needed to do let me wait until you get this next slide up. Okay, while we're waiting, I'll just continue. We had to there we go. Thank you. We had to accelerate the capital expense repairs to the tracks and bridges. So we had to put out a lot more money, and we had to put out we actually went overseas to buy state-of-the-art from Placer Corporation, track maintenance and rehabilitation equipment. First time an American railroad company had really gone over and bought into track supply equipment for rehabbing the tracks on a civil engineering basis from the Europeans, because they had the state-of-the-art stuff, because they were building stuff where the machinery was putting in very high engineering tolerance tracks for very high speed trains. So we needed that productive capability. So Conrail was the first at the engineering department level to go out and invest in that kind of equipment and pour that into the track repair essentially. Our goal was to eliminate the slow orders across the mainline network, adjust the budget to accommodate the unexpected continued operating noise loss level that we were having. And that meant in turn that we had to request additional federal funding. That wasn't in the final system plan that we were going to get additional funding. So that was the first flaw. By around 1980, internally, we also were the first, we did it on our own. We didn't have to get it requested. We didn't have to respond to a request from the feds. We did it on our own. We drafted at the executive level at Conrail a final system plan version 2 for realizing we had to extend the recovery time and we would need additional funding. And realizing, and the feds then use that as a negotiating arm to say, well, we're going to limit the amount of additional funding we're going to give you. So what are you going to do about that? So, well, we had to propose spin-off of passenger assets and operations to others like New Jersey Transit. And we had to come up with new ways to become better and faster at putting out rate adjustments and making competitive rate adjustments to compete with the trucks, which were still the primary focus. So Conrail executive leadership under Charlie Marshall and a few others were basically led the early drafting of the Staggers Act. I'm not quite sure how many people who are members of the Conrail Historical Society remember that a lot of the groundwork for the Staggers Act actually came out of the Conrail Legal and Marketing Department. And there was initially the last line on that slide is important, particularly the last section of the last line. Initially, the Staggers Act was resisted by most of the other AAR member railroad companies. Yet, if you go onto the AAR's website today in 2021, you're going to say, whoa, the Staggers Act, the railroads, lo and behold, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Bread rates are down 44% from where aren't we great and beating themselves on the chest, not remembering that most of them didn't like the Staggers Act. So anyways, I thought that's a kind of an interesting sidelight. That's, of course, my opinion. You're going to find people at other railroads who are going to disagree with Jim Blaze, but that's okay. Now, if we go to the next slide, do you know what Conrail ran? That Conrail ran a huge contracted branch line service between 1976 and 1980. This is actually my first job. I was hired because while I was at USRA, I took a trackage rights agreement and I composed an agreement for using that to service the isolated Cairo, Illinois branch, which was going to be conveyed to Conrail because it was the highest producing coal branch, but it was isolated from the rest of the Conrail network. And we weren't going to rebuild the rest of the track along Eastern Illinois all the way up to Chicago. So we needed trackage rights to get out. And after I proposed that to Jim Hagan and Jim McClellan, who were my bosses down at USRA, I said, we could take this one step further. I said, there's going to be the need to subsidize all these branch lines because there's something like 9,000 to 10,000 miles of branch line that were under options for not being conveyed to Conrail. I said, let's just assume that half of that is not conveyed to Conrail. There's an expectation under the law, federal law that's creating Conrail, that somebody is going to operate this because there's going to be 100% subsidy for the first 3 years and then a decaying subsidy down to the 70% level for the following years. Is Conrail going to be ready to do this? And they said, well, it should be. And I said, so we could use this trackage rights agreement and set up a 3-party agreement and have contracted service, which Conrail would run for a period of time. And the USRA people shook their heads up and said, yeah, that's a pretty good idea. Why don't you work on that? So I worked that all up. Now, remember, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm doing this illegally, I guess. But I'm not practicing law. I'm just practicing as a strategic planner. And so we came up with this contract, and that's actually how I got hired, because I was hired to work with a guy named Bill Black, an economist and professor from University of Indiana. And he and I put this together with a team of people. Down at the bottom of this slide, I want to draw your attention to the people that help, because this was not a Jim Blaze alone rescue effort. I had people like Michael J. Connor, Joe Caruso in finance, accounting, Rick Hoffman, Tom Heber, and there were a whole bunch of others, but I didn't have enough room to put everybody's name down. The point is that we had a team to put this together. And for the first full year of operation, which would have been the contract year 1977, we had about $65 million in revenue, plus we earned an administrative fee of 10% above that. Plus, we had the responsibility for expensing and managing accelerated maintenance for the subsidized track work, because a lot of this didn't even conform to Federal Railroad Administration Track 1 safety standards at 10 miles an hour. So we were operating at below FRA 1 under a waiver. And so all that work had to be done. So the first year to second year's worth of work, this is an $85 million annual budget. Now remember, Conrail didn't want to have anything to do with these lines because they were deemed unprofitable and thus not going to be conveyed to Conrail, which meant that we were operating as Conrail as a contracted service. There were 13 state contracts plus about 6 other contracts involving private companies like Dow, and 2 ferry boat operations, one of which I got to drive while we were in Lake Michigan, because I went on my inspection trips, one of the highlights of the year 1978. But that $85 million worth of work was deemed as not worthy of Conrail's management attention. And there were a number of reasons why. But I wanted to point out that if I convert that to $85 million to 2021 dollars, that's about $400 million worth of business annually that you're walking away from. That's a huge amount of money. Instead, what we did was we helped transition these lines, and there were something like 350 lines, some of them as short as a quarter to half a mile, and some of them as long as the Ann Arbor, from Ann Arbor, Michigan to the float operation all the way across to the Wisconsin side. So some of these were pretty big operations. But we transitioned those mostly to short line operators, and we had most of that done by the year 1981, 1982. So I was out of business as a short line contract manager, and I went to work for a guy named John Williams out of Southern Pacific, and I started doing merger analysis, which turned out to be kind of interesting and more exciting, but certainly different, because a lot different than short lines. Anyways, so Conrail basically helped do this transition period, and a lot of people, and I don't think it was ever written up by anybody like Trains Magazine. So if somebody wants to do a special on for the Conrail Historical Society, this is a really interesting story. We'd have to interview guys like Mike Connors, Joe Caruso. I'm not sure Joe's still around. Mr. Hoffman unfortunately died last year, and Tom Heber is around. So there's a number of people that you can put that together. An interesting story about the world's biggest contract short line operation, whose main goal was to transition and put itself out of business. I don't know. Maybe no one will buy that story. Maybe it's just too unbelievable. If we go on to the next line.
I'm going to just jump in here real quick, Jim. The subsidized operations you were just talking about,
Yes,
are discussed in our most recent quarterly magazine that came out about 2 weeks ago. Part of the CA&C line in Ohio was subsidized by the state of Ohio. So it's actually discussed in that article.
yeah. The question was, did we operate it first for the 1 or 2 or 3 years before it transitioned over to them?
It was actually operated by Conrail for about 1.5 years and then abandoned.
There you go. That meant Michael J. Connors was out there looking at that line, and I actually might have gone out and inspected at one point, or had some contact with the state of Ohio people, from an administrative point of view. But
Yeah,
it was a huge operation, really, and for most part, most people don't know about it. Okay, so thank you for that point.
Yeah.
So I think the next line is from losses to net operating income, generating cash. With the arrival of Mr. Crane, which is about 1980, end of 1979, somewhere in there. He basically showed up and he says, "Gentlemen," we were mostly guys, there were a few women, but "Gentlemen, no more hockey stick. No more tonnage and revenue increases suddenly going upward. That's not going to be the plan we're going to be announcing for our shareholder board of directors," which would have been the U.S. Department of Treasury, right? Because all the shares converted from the bankrupt companies were held in the U.S. Treasury because we were a nationalized company, right? Yes, we were. So we're not going back to our government people and saying we need more money. We need to figure out how to eliminate this hockey stick put a revenue projection that's realistic, that most of the businesses are coming back, and this is how we're going to survive without and eventually become privatizable. And so we basically, under Mr. Crane's direction, the thrust of the company was we got to get as quickly as possible from losing $1 million a day to making X amount of hundreds of thousands a day. How do we do that? And one of the lessons he had was, well, you know, we got all these rails and ties, and we put them in the ground. We just put them in the wrong ground, some places in wrong places. Yeah, let me show you as an engineer how we're going to take that stuff out and move it to other places, so we don't have to go buy more of this. Oh, well, why don't we just give it back to the federal government? No, you don't understand, Jim Blaze. The federal government doesn't know at the treasury level how to take back debt due or materials due in the form of materials. They want money. So our goal is to basically earn as much money as we can and put it in a savings bank account. In the meantime, yes.
Can I tell a short little L. Stanley Crane story?
Absolutely.
This is Gary Sample. I was working as a assistant manager of special equipment in the mechanical department in Philadelphia in the late 70s and early 80s. And a guy who worked with me, the late Bill Draper, he and I used to leave about 10 after 5, 15 after 5, because remember, there was like a traffic jam of people leaving at 5 p.m. out of Sixpence Center. So we left a little later one day, and we're going down the elevator, and the elevator door opens on the ground floor. None other than an L. Stanley Crane was running against the current of traffic because he was going up the elevator. So Bill said to me, "Gee, Gary, I almost knocked over that little guy." And I said, "Do you know who that little guy is?" And he says, "No." He says, "You know him?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "That's L. Stanley Crane." And Bill said, "Whoops."
Well, thank you for that story. That gave me a chance to catch my breath too. Thank you. Well, anyways, Mr. Crane said, "Look, gentlemen, we need to turn this and hit some black ink. It'll be a signal that we're turning." And I believe the black ink was either 36 or $39 million. I couldn't look it up this morning when I was doing the slides, but it was less than $50 million. But within 4 years, we turned the company around collectively under this kind of new thinking. And we were getting some traffic back, but we weren't going to claw back to what the plan was. But nevertheless, we within 4 years, our net operating income was reported as $500 million by the year 1985. And that basically sustained the argument for the next slide, the header of which some of you are old enough to remember, "Let Conrail be Conrail." We needed we needed evidence that we could survive without Norfolk Southern's help. We needed to counter the argument that only NS was strong enough to assure that Conrail could survive in the long term. And this was kind of a big hurdle because Mr. and Mrs. Dole, one in the Senate and one heading the U.S. Department of Transportation, had already mandated and gotten approval from one of the houses of Congress that this was going to be a done deal. NS was taking this over. And Stan Crane led the multiple supporting, put in a lot of the executive energy necessary and leadership. And together with other folks who on the Norfolk on the Conrail team helped win the bid. Under the NS deal, $1 billion for Conrail as is would have been paid, but NS would have gotten billions of dollars in tax loss carried forward benefits. So that wasn't such a big deal. And NS would have kept the $1 billion worth of cash that we had squirreled away since we started making money back in 1980, 81. Under the Conrail deal, we gave the cash back. And the shareholders of record basically exceeded a $2 billion payout. I think it was close to 2.7 billion was the valuation of the Conrail deal. So it was a much better financial deal at the time of the transaction, which would of course been in 1987. And so So that was good. Well, now we're independent. And if we go to the next slide, that doesn't mean the challenges are over. We had to figure out how to continue growth. There was some met coal and increasing double stack container traffic that was going to help us, but utility coal was threatened. The Staggers Act freedom gave us particular help, particularly in the period 1982 through about 1988. Because we had been the proponent at the executive level of the Staggers Act. Once the Staggers Act was implemented, we were really fast as Conrail was out of the box, figuring out a slice and dice and do the new pricing and new cost allocations and new competitive service offerings than our railroad competitors were. So we, for a number of years, were stealing business from CSX and NS where we had same competitive lanes. So that helped us, and we continued, of course, to downsize to match the lower customer offered business base. So downsizing or rationalization, as some people call it, continued into the 1992 period. And if we go to the next slide, during that period, I was tasked by Dave Levan and others with Jim Hagan's blessing to take a look at, was there a way that we could get into the international organization so that we could capture more of the intermodal business for our trains? We couldn't really do it on the Pacific coast because so much of that was being handled by American President's Lines, the first user, maritime user who figured out how to take the Southern Pacific's double stack car and commercialize it. Thank God for outside thinking by maritime graduates in the U.S. Maritime Academy, because we, the railroads, hadn't figured out how to do that. But nothing was happening on the Atlantic between Europe and America, and so Conrail wasn't really an originator westbound for a lot of this intermodal traffic. So we were tasked with working with some folks over in Europe and working with people like UPS and FedEx to see if we could rent some of their supply chain technology, mostly their ordering systems, their currency exchange systems, et cetera, like that, and see if we could put together a service where Ford parts moving from Kansas City to a Ford plant in Frankfurt, Germany, just as an example. There were other supply chain flows, but this is a clear example. So they would be organized and put on Norfolk Southern trains, and those trains would then basically, when they reached St. Louis or Chicago as the first western point of an interchange with Conrail, they would move on Conrail all the way, rest of the way, to the East Coast Atlantic ports. And we would organize as part of this business venture, even putting them on the ships. In other words, we were going to be what's called a freight forwarder, international freight forwarder. We'd buy a small freight forwarder and we would evolve that freight forwarder to become a Conrail subsidiary, much like Conrail Mercury was a Conrail subsidiary. And this was a low asset base. We didn't have to go out and buy assets, so it wasn't adding a burden to our balance sheet. And a low employee base because we were using computer systems and technology. It wasn't a large manned operation. Logistics and billing software rented from these other companies. So there wasn't a lot of expense to get the company going. And we projected out what we thought were going to be a reasonable 5 to 6 year business plan with a pro forma income statement, operating cash flow and all that. And while it passed the hurdles, it was rejected because there was really insufficient internal support within the Conrail base of the key 5 or 6 key departments that are responsible for making most of the executive decisions in this kind of an area of an acquisition. And so we canned the project. And I saw John Spahalski was on this call. I don't know whether that's the same John Spahalski from University of Pennsylvania, from Penn State that I know.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is, Jim. Good to see you.
John, nice to hear your voice. Well, John, as you will be able to attest to our audience, there was Dr. Kant Rao, sadly departed these many years now. But he was part of the team. We had Marvin Mannheim from Northwestern. We had some really, and we had people from Cambridge Systematics. We had a huge team of really expert people who were used to doing this in other modal industries, who were basically helped us put this plan together for Conrail that we had to drop. Well, while I was sad to see that the plan dropped, I am grateful for one other thing. Within about 10 years, the project was picked up and pursued independently by Canadian National. So the idea was right, even if it wasn't accepted by our management team. Now, that's just an aside, because any one of these things that we're talking about here in this Jim Blaze's recollection of little points of tension and creativity that were open to Conrail or available to Conrail that were either passed on or changed. Any one of these combinations, these could have changed Conrail's fortunes going forward. So let's move forward then back to the period 1992 to 1994. While we were pursuing this international business opportunity, Conrail was busy also doing its business plan review. And because I was director of strategic planning at that time, but because this was before it transferred later on in 1995 to Las Pasa, I basically worked with Ram Sharam and most of the department heads largely in the marketing area to do our business plan review. And I found this slide when I was looking through my notes this morning. This is from our 1994 Conrail Business Plan Strategic Review, which is multi-departmental, and it said, hey, we as Conrailers at the senior level say our future is projected on nominal market growth above inflation, and need for coal efficiencies because we think coal will not go away. That was a seriously flawed assumption, colleagues, because we did not have growth that was equal to, let alone above inflation, or was equal to GDP. In fact, we weren't even keeping up with that half of GDP by that time of by that period, about late 1990s into 2000. By that time, GDP was becoming 50% or greater services, and 50% or less the sort of the industrial and the hard products that the railroad freight industry moves on. And so that first period packet was flawed. Now, we also said we need to have a continuous emphasis on a company going forward from 1994 into 1996, 1997. We needed continuous emphasis on asset utilization. That's true, but we did not have this Hunter Harrison so-called precision scheduled railroading emphasis on asset utilization that we see in today. We didn't have that kind of an appetite or expectation that we had to have that kind of a need. I'm not going to say that that was a flawed assumption. I'm just pointing out that it doesn't match our thinking in terms of the level of emphasis we had to put on asset utilization was pretty mild compared to what the level of asset utilization has been over the last 5 to 6 years by the remaining Class 1 railroads here in North America. We weren't playing that kind of game. We needed critical need for personal injury reductions. Okay, I really don't have much to say about that. It's there, and I left it there because. And we said we needed to have service quality and cost through process improvement. So we had a continuous quality improvement program, and we needed to keep emphasizing that. This is kind of these points are important, but what's not shown in that slide is if you go to my next slide. At the same time, that slide kind of ignored what was behind everybody's thinking on the executive floor at 21st Street and Market, because we had moved to the new headquarters by then. Yeah. Since Conrail, there had been other mega mergers. And now in the 1993, 1994, we were witnessing Chicago Northwestern and Union Pacific. That was followed within a year by BN merging with Santa Fe. And then by, of course, 1995, so within a year of this slide, the last slide being shown, the Union Pacific was going to merge with Southern Pacific. Oops, I didn't capitalize Southern. Sorry about that. So was Conrail safe or too small? Is our territory being penetrated? Was our previous set of assumptions that that's what we needed to focus on in order to be successful? Was that sufficient? Or no, we were, I think collectively on, I forget what, for, I think the 18th floor was the executive floor at 21 Market Street. Anyways, there was a lot of nervousness on the executive floor. I was not an AVP or VP, but I networked with all the people on those floors. So day after day, I always got to see what was going on the executive floor. And I was a pretty good observer. And people were nervous about these mergers. So if we go to the next slide, one of the reasons they were nervous was a guy named Jim Blaze. Oh, that's me. I prepared this little slide. Doesn't look like much. Oh, come on. This is an analogy of a cigar box. This is the Conrail's franchise as it was given to us by the Congress in the final system plan back in 1975, 76. And it assumes we're going to have these high density lines and we're going to have this like a cigar box, a protected franchise. And we're going to drive down costs in our key lanes and we're going to be the number one competitive off-rail freight product in this. Well, I prepared this slide and then I prepared another slide that was the same box and I couldn't find the box this morning, the second slide this morning, but it's the same box. Only if you can imagine, close your eyes, now open them, look at the box and imagine that this box is being eaten away on the sides by carpenter ants. There's an erosion to this franchise. The protected white borderline is being bypassed, transloading, intermodal, what have you. And so we gave this slide to the senior officers, and at one time this slide went to one of the board of directors meetings. The year again was 1975. Excuse me, 1995. It was during the pending Union Pacific Southern Pacific announced merger. And they saw the first slide and then they saw the second slide. And somebody said, boy, Jim, those two slides sure got a lot of attention and discussion. It's one of those few examples I have where, gee, if you had both slides looking at it, it takes you like about 5 seconds. Most slides, the rule of thumb is the author should convey its message in the graphic in 30 seconds or less. Now, these were like 5-second slides. And essentially that led to the question, what are you going to do about this? So if we go to the next slide, one of the other databases that argues this is we had been very successful in implementing the final system plan principles by reducing the number of main lines and increasing the amount of traffic density we had on the resulting main lines. And so this is a slide that says between 1980 and 1994, what was the change in millions of gross ton miles? And we're only showing 2 lanes here. I have slides in my saved files that look at other lanes, but this one was comparing the St. Louis Gateway and St. Elmo Gateway with the Porter South Bend Chicago Gateway. And you can see that we were being very successful over this period of 1980 to 1994 in increasing the traffic density on the old New York Central main line of Conrail. But we were at best just kind of holding our own on the St. Louis, Effingham, St. Elmo Gateway. And that was part of this making us nervous. How good was our franchise that we had been granted? And so if we go to the next slide. The other thing is some people don't like the nice slides and they don't like things to be visualized graphically with too much simplicity. They like to see numbers. Okay, so we had some numbers. This is a simplified version of what was Conrail's street valuation in 1994. Street valuation is code for, what's market value is a stock traded company. And Conrail's kind of at the bottom of the list. Colleagues, it is not good to be at the bottom of any such comparative list, because that means you're either a weak person or you're a target. You could be both. So we're considering these variables of the protection of our franchise offers. Can somebody penetrate it with different operations or marketing or pricing? We're talking about we're not getting the density on all of our lines. That means essentially we got another wave of market rationalizations for our operating main lines, which is code for cutting. And then, financially, we're only worth $5.4 billion. What are we going to do about this? Well, if we go to the next slide, Conrail executive team and the board of directors decided to make the eastern play for the Southern Pacific's eastern part. I actually thought this was a bold strategy, but I'm reminded of conversations I had with senior executives like Charlie Marshall that said, man, mergers are a dangerous thing. When you put them into play, you're going to be prepared for unexpected outcomes. So this was a Conrail play. We offered a pro-competitive market play where Conrail acquires the eastern portion of the Southern Pacific. That would be the Illinois to Texas and Mexican border lines at Laredo of the Southern Pacific and so-called Cotton Belt lines. There was a negotiated purchase offer made to the Union Pacific, Southern Pacific for the deal sometime in the fall, early winter of 1995, which was rejected. I don't recall what the offer was. I've heard various sources that were normally dependable, but I can't confirm whether they're accurate. We offered $1 billion to $1.5 billion. Again, who knows? Could have been higher, could have been lower. I just don't know. But it was reasonable. It had to be a reasonable amount of money because you're purchasing a good slice of the Southern Pacific's key assets, and Union Pacific rejected it. So what was our follow-up? Well, it was decided that we would protest with various presentations and evidence that the Union Pacific, Southern Pacific was anti-competitive, particularly in the certain lanes having to do with hazmat materials, which would have come up and down the eastern properties of the intended Union Pacific, Southern Pacific company, and it would be anti-competitive because they would monopolize certain of the Laredo and El Paso crossings and so forth, so on. So we filed all those statements with the Union Pacific. There was another way to have played this, though. We could have filed an inconsistent application at the Surface Transportation or at the Interstate Commerce Commission. If you'd filed an inconsistent application at the Surface Transportation Board, or I'm sorry, ICC, they would have had to pay more attention comparing the benefits, costs, and competitive aspects of one merger to another, rather than just looking at the pro formas and all the financial numbers and the change in so-called financial positions, et cetera, that normally are part of the checklist that the ICC, now the Surface Transportation Board, is going to go through for the Kansas City Southern, and they would have had to really pay a lot of serious, well, they didn't have to pay much to us, and they rejected us. They rejected the Conrail so the merger was approved. While the merger was while this Southern Pacific play was being considered by the ICC, Conrail offered, I believe, its third buyout. I predicted personally that we were going to lose, and I wasn't sure what was the second game plan. And because we were in play under Jim Blaze's thinking of, because I was the guy that did the discovery for almost every merger case I went to the discovery files and got to see all the raw data and all the behind the scenes shenanigans of every merger from the one in 1979 with us that involved CSX right through to this merger. So I got to see a lot of stuff that everybody else at Conrail didn't get to see because they were prohibited from going into those files. Jim Blaze wasn't prohibited. This is one of the things where I got to learn a lot of things about the politics and the economics of what was going on and building these merger cases, what was going to be accomplished, and later on then auditing myself. Well, what did they say they were going to do versus what did they actually do? Oh, there's a big difference. So I looked at this and I made a personal life choice decision with my wife, and I said, and I got a 2-year salary coming up as an IRA. Let's put that in the bank. I'll get a job as a consultant or co-teacher, whatever, and we'll use the 2 years IRA, and we'll take our 35 cruises while I'm still healthy. I'm glad I did all that because I don't have my legs and knees anymore. So that was a great personal plan, but I left because I thought we were going to lose. We did lose. Conrail lost, and the Southern Pacific Union Pacific case went through, and they had a lot of problems with their mergers. So that wasn't the end of the story, though. Then I believe it was late June, early July of 1996 when the ICC made the announcement that they were going to allow the Union Pacific Southern Pacific merger to go through. Is this the end of the story for Conrail? No, it is not the end of the story, because if you go down, well, before you leave this slide, I want to draw your attention to the second line where it says late 1995, Conrail play. Jim Blaze would like to maybe reword that to have said to you, the audience. As of late 1995, Conrail itself was now in play. Now, why would I say that? Well, because I knew that essentially the board saw that franchises was being eroded, and we thought the play was to expand our franchise box out to Texas. And if we lost that, how comfortable could the board of directors and the senior officers at Conrail still be? Well, we'll just go back to business as Congress gave it to us. No. There's no going back. You realized your franchise is being somehow eroded. It's under attack. What any board of directors, I presume, would have been asking, okay, so you lost this. What's our next move? Okay, so next slide. If you put the next slide up. Meanwhile, oops, go to the next one. Did we miss one? Meanwhile. And we missed one. Go back. I'm looking for the one that says, meanwhile, down in Norfolk. There we are. Thank you very much. Meanwhile, down in Norfolk Southern was worried about continued long-term loss of coal volume. Both Jim McClellan and Jim Blaze had used the same consultant and brought them in to meet with certain Conrail or Norfolk Southern senior executives, separately, of course. The consultant was pointing out why coal was going to be goes at some point in the strategically going to turn to a downstream commodity. Now, this was a hard sell at Conrail, and even a harder sell probably at Norfolk Southern, because there was a lot invested in running and operating and maintaining the entire operation of Norfolk Southern and parts of Conrail based off the coal traffic. Now, if it was true, guys like Jim McClellan would have said, well, Norfolk Southern needs to diversify its traffic base. Now, how do I know this? Well, I worked for Jim McClellan twice, once at USRA and against shortly after this period where I left Conrail. And so Jim McClellan and I had a lot of stories. And so I got to know behind the scenes that he and other executives had bought into this knowledge that, well, we need to diversify our traffic base. So the only way we could diversify our traffic base is somehow do a deal with Conrail. And they kept trying that deal. And so if you go, now remember, this is my interpretation. And if you talk to Mike McClellan, another former Conrail employee and son of Jim McClellan, he might tell you a different story. But if you read Jim McClellan's book, I think you're going to see that what I've said in the previous slide is a sustainable position. All right, so if we go to the next slide, meanwhile, what does Dave Levan do now that he has taken over the company as chief executive officer? Remember, the company was not put into play while he was chief executive officer, because we made this bid before that transfer of power. So the company was kind of put into play with the previous chief executive officer. What does Dave Levan do while his board and his fellow chief executive officers are sitting around the round table at the Conrail at the inner so-called inner office that Mr. Crane used to have? They used to have a little round table, only probably sit about 5 people. So when those 5 or 6 people got around that little round table, what are they thinking? What do we do? Because our franchise is being eroded. So within 3 months of the ICC rejection, I'm pretty sure that they had considered buying Sioux or former Milwaukee Railroad properties, maybe expanding to the Northern Plains, Midwestern section. But did that give them enough robustness? Or are we back to this, that's like a DNH expansion. You're not going to get critical mass. All of these things have to be going through their minds. What happened was there was a white knight friendly merger negotiated between Mr. Snow, CSX, and Mr. Levan at Conrail. Weakness of the deal was a cash plus stock deal. All cash deals, Conrail colleagues, are the ones that get Wall Street's attention. Remember that. Equal split of the resulting management seats and preservation of much of the Conrail culture. I think that was really important, particularly in conversations I had with Levan through my career, with Jim Hagan, with other people. Even though the folks down at the law department said, hey, Conrail culture, that's worth fighting for with our shareholders in Wall Street. So the white knight deal was, in my opinion, something that probably should have been expected. And I think it was down in Norfolk, their worst fear, and yet their opportunity, because it was a cash plus stock deal. Ooh, an opening. So if we go to the next slide, all cash and a bigger credit rating. That's Trump's stock and the equity mix anytime, and the implied deal was probably that for the CSX White Knight deal was probably higher than 6.5 billion. I think it was somewhere in the area of 7 to 8 billion. Now the number's a little foggy, but because the weakness was the stock part of the deal. The stock had to perform in order for you to hit the certain pro forma future expectations, or those number of targets wouldn't be hit. But by the time the Conrail War for Conrail ended, the 1997, 1988, early 1988 terms were closer to 10.5 billion. That's a big difference. That's so who won, who lost? If we go to the next slide. Well, the real early winners were clearly Conrail shareholders, because did you remember that both NS and CSX share prices tanked during the first year or two of they're trying to put the Conrail split together? Yeah, so early cash winners, clearly Conrail shareholders. If we go to the next slide, and this is my final slide, yay. And then I can listen to your comments and learn something. I'm not learning something while I'm talking. Was the splitting of Conrail a management failure or a victory? I get asked this question particularly a lot when I'm overseas. Oh, you worked for Conrail. Oh, you guys lost. You lost control of the company. You were losers. What? First of all, we got rich because we had a lot of share offerings, and so a lot of our payments were basically our payments for the stock achievement part of our payment package was well over what we got as annual salaries. Most people internationally don't think about that because most railroads are nationalized, so they don't have these kinds of deals. But the biggest argument I like to make is, look, if you're a management team and you're in charge of a stock traded company, you have a fiduciary responsibility to protect the interests of the shareholders. How do you do that? Well, making them wealthier is kind of looked upon as a success check mark. So turning over a restored and safe enterprise for continued public use after picking it up in terms of the unforeseen liabilities we had back in 1976, in the earlier slides I pointed out. Yeah, I think if those of us who were part of the Conrail management team back then can hold our heads proud and say, yeah, we did our job best we could. In some parts of the game you win, in some parts of the game you lose. But overall, I think this was a great success story. It was not a Penn Central crisis circa 1969, 1979 reorganization. That's not how Conrail went out the door. That, colleagues, probably ends my well too winded and long comments, but it's like this. I was proud that I was given this opportunity because this is how I think about my Conrail career and my Conrail time. It was the highlight of my entire career, and I've been a lot of places, done a lot of things. I look back and I say, my 21 years, they were a great time. And I learned a lot from all the people I worked with. So it's my privilege to address you today. And with that, I will zip her up.
Thank you very much, Jim. I will see if anyone else has any questions and stuff for you. Otherwise, I've got a whole list. So,
Rudy, can I ask? May I ask one?
Sure, go ahead.
If the Conrail franchise eroded so significantly, say post 1976, with the benefit of 2020 hindsight, what would you determine could have preserved or enhanced the franchise?
Speaking as an engineer, a marketing person, and one who looks at the competition, I'm not quite sure that there was a way, short of any competitive behavior, to protect the franchise. I think even in today's terms, what a lot of the dysfunction that's going on in the supply chains that we've seen, it's because there's new ways of competing, new technology, new engineering. And I think that mergers and acquisitions are, and the fallout of certain companies is part of the private enterprise system. I think it's a natural occurrence and pattern that you have to expect is going to occur.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Jim?
Well done, Jim. Well done, Jim. I'm sorry, this is John Spolowski. If I'm out of place, put me in the clear.
You're fine.
Okay, lined and locked normal. Let me go ahead. That vignette about international supply chain, Jim, that's just one, but still a kind of an intriguing part of the story in the broader sense of trying to bring more, shall we say, broad-based supply chain vision to trying to build a traffic base for a railroad.
Yes.
And I guess you covered basically why it did or didn't work, but the question is, have you ever looked at what CN has tried to do with it in any detail?
I have not seen that Canadian National has been particularly successful, but on the other hand, I have been able to compare one-on-one as what they're intending to do as to how we were going to do it differently.
Yeah,
But I do think, John, that it is pretty clear to me that even if you look at intermodal, which is supposed to be the growth engine for the railroads, yeah, it's going to replace the traffic we lost from coal, blah, 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 all that argument. Now, intermodal is stumbling. And I think the real question is who controls the intermodal supply chain and decides whether it's going to go on a semi-trailer or it's going to go on railroad A or railroad B. And to me, what I was learning from John Spahalski and Kent Rao and others that I was associated with back in the 1990 period was these decisions and these control points of the supply chains and these influences of which mode gets picked,
yeah.
they may be made by logisticians with computer formulas. And that's going to be even emphasized even more once we have true visibility, because companies like Nexiot show up and start showing us exactly where by moment of time, not only the rail car asset is, but more importantly, where the just-in-time stock of the inventory in motion is for the customer. And I think all of these points say that it is kind of ridiculous for railroads to assume that they can manage that supply chain. Because railroads really, when you stop and think about it, and what makes the railroads different and what kind of industry do I think they are? I think they think like real estate companies. Because they know that there's an implied implicit value of the assemblage of these long linear paths that are hard to replicate. If the railway fails, they can always turn them into toll roads or utility rights away. Now, that's not a typical way for a railroad person like me to think, but I've been influenced by educators such as you, John, to think differently. I'm not a typical railroad guy.
And of course, related to that is you look at where's the growth in freight traffic coming and what sectors. And, you know, we've both paid attention to this for a long time. But when you look at percentage changes in the demand for freight transport by length of haul, for example, type of commodity, value versus ton, weight, all of that, all those variables, there's a game that the railroads aren't readily able to play very effectively with the way they're configured now.
Yeah, some one or more could reconfigure themselves. But I think the next play for them is to figure out, how do I put this network and eliminate all these interchange points? So I think it's naturally in their DNA, particularly if they think like real estate people, that there will be a transcontinental merger unless regulations prohibit it, because that's the game they know how to play.
Yeah, and then is the game we know how to play, where does that fit relative to the potential for growth?
There's a clearly a risk profile here. That, I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about talking about that to you folks today, so I don't have my notes ready.
Yeah. I don't want to take too much time, but I have one last vignette. Remember that attempt to get some of that steel business off of so-called Michigan trains, the overweight trucks that are permitted between various automotive and other steel user assembly plants in Michigan and the steel producing area of northwestern Indiana. And remember, Conrail recently tried a short dedicated steel market train that was targeted toward that business, trying to grab it from the truckers. And it went on for a while, but the grapevine to me had the Conrail operating department was opposed to that from the word get-go. And they were running it over what I call the Michigan Central too. That was another thing. You had to pay trackage rights to Amtrak between Porter and Kalamazoo. But the fact of the matter was that the transit times and everything were supposed to be geared to match the truckers' transit times and other dimensions of service quality.
Yeah, so we didn't sustain and we didn't win. I don't have enough. I'd like to look at the evidence in the case study deeper before I would answer. So I can't volunteer, John, just off the cuff why it failed. That would be impolite to those who were involved.
Okay. Well, thank you. I won't take up any more Sandhouse discussion time here. So.
John, it was nice chatting with you again after all these years.
Jim? Jim?
Yes.
Gary Sample again. Do you think the railroads are missing some opportunity by not going after some of the short haul intermodal business? Because they tend to say, well, anything less than 450 miles, we're not interested. Wouldn't there be some possibilities where they could, with the smaller crews we have today, do you think there's some opportunity in the short haul intermodal?
Yes, I do, but I'm also a great believer after my 17 years of being educated by the engineers at Zeta Tech how to think like an engineer, even though I'm not a licensed engineer. And combine that with the economics. I'm a great believer that the number one reason why we don't have a short haul intermodal is we haven't figured out how to quickly load and unload semi-trailers. We were given a gift by the engineers who helped develop the double stack so that we could go off to long haul traffic with containers, double stack containers. That gave us a 35 to 45% cost advantage. Holy moly, that's a huge advantage. Well, so we can move still today on a cost basis at probably less than $1. A 53-foot loaded semi-container, a mile using a double stack train. I'm just talking about one of the twos. The cost, operation cost is a mile. Well, the best the trucker can do is probably on a fully allocated basis, is on a cost basis. We're not talking to what price they charge, which is cost. It's probably $1.40 to $1.60. And that's with diesel prices at $3 or less. If diesel prices go to $4.50, well, then the game changes a bit. We do not have that for getting semi-trailers off the road, and most of the traffic, highway traffic I see on the road is still semi-trailers, hasn't converted to double stack. And there's no reason to do it for these short haul lanes like Nashville to Louisville. Well, why would you necessarily have to get? Well, because that's the only way you can ride on a double stack train. Yeah, but then I got to go into this terminal. It's $50 to put the thing on and $50 to take it off, and that's too much time. By that time, I'm halfway from Nashville to Louisville. So we have to figure out how to get an engineering product at a price to do that. Now, there are at least 2 or 3 manufacturers in Europe that have that kind of equipment for ready, fast, on-off semi-trailer loading, but the cost per platform is somewhere between $350,000 to a reported $550,000 per platform. That's the capital cost to get into the business. The cost for a platform for a double stack is about $100,000 to $110,000. Whoa, there's a big match here. So if somebody's going to take the engineering that's been developed by 3 different product manufacturers and enter into this market and allow us to get into the short haul market, then in my eyes, they have to figure out how to manufacture this bloody new product at a heck of a lot cheaper cost. I may have talked too fast. Maybe you should call me later and talk to me.
No, that's good. Thank you.
It's complex.
Yeah, it is. It's more complex than meets the eye sometimes.
Well, if nobody else has anything else for Jim, I've got at least 2 and possibly a couple more. We'll see how much time we've got and how long it takes to answer these 2.
Rudy, can I make a comment?
Sure, go ahead.
This is Barry Baines. I was with CSX and I was involved with Iron Highway, which was the concept to build a train that would allow for the fast unload and offload of trailers for short haul markets. And it was being developed in the 1990s. Then, of course, the Conrail situation develops. CSX spends their money on the integration with Conrail, and the capital support Iron Highway sort of went away. It was low priority. But the whole concept of Iron Highway was to try to provide a short haul marketing opportunity by providing a platform that was efficient to load, unload, and go after the short haul traffic. But it was a victim of history. You know, other priorities took place and that concept sort of went away.
Let me respond to that because that's a good point. I have a mailing list of about 45 people, most of us retired old blokes. And we communicate back and forth. And one of them is Steve Dittmeyer. The other one is Chris Rooney. I'll just like to mention them by name because I am the sum of what I've learned from them on I'm not the genius that independently came up with this response, but the Iron Highway technology was transferred to Canadian Pacific, and Canadian Pacific successfully operated that, I believe, in the Quebec to Montreal lane until last year, when the equipment finally wore out and they decided not to reinvest in it. But they would run these short trains, and they would run them at night in both directions. And when the equipment rode out, they decided not to reinvest in it. Now, that's kind of interesting because I want to point out that the road rail equipment is similarly facing this issue, that it will run until it has to be replaced, and then nobody's going to rebuild it again. The real question is, why, even when these were tested, first on CSX, then on CP, in the case that you bring up, why did they not reach critical mass? Why was the test limited to 1 or 2, or possibly just 3 railroads in the case of road railer? And then it just kind of fell by the wayside. Was it because they weren't promoted? They weren't operated correctly? They weren't priced right? Somebody really ought to go in and do what I would call a business case audit, Harvard business case review, and say, well, this is why it worked out this way. This is where the change points, inflections were. This is how the costs and the benefits kind of got misaligned. This is what a critical mass would have been. Nobody does that. Surface Transportation Board doesn't do that. U.S. Department of Transportation doesn't do that. Department of Commerce doesn't do that. The equivalent agencies in Canada don't do that. So it's no wonder that we have the kind of this capital investment and this engineering technology, and the marketing test is being done, and then nobody sits there and tells us, well, this is why it's failed or it's not being continued. So there's an intellectual loss of knowledge, tremendous intellectual loss of knowledge. Who's responsible for that? Is it the Class 1 railroads or some other? I have no idea. I'm mystified by it. Disappointed too.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation because at least with CSX, when we started back in the early 1990s, it was a New York air brake concept. And they were the ones that presented it, I think, at an intermodal conference earlier. It gained some interest. CSX started looking into it, but it was a New York air brake led development effort. And the concept was not just to have platforms, but to have power, specialized power at both ends of the train. You wouldn't be using standard freight locomotives because you're trying to take advantage of the lightweight and the low clearance of the cars. So you were going to develop basically a complete package that would basically shuttle from point A to point B. They never got to the point of getting the power developed, which would have helped with the economics. And of course, they did run some test runs, but I seem to recall, and I could be totally wrong, that the CSX owned platforms ended up going to Australia. I don't know if that's true or not, because I left the company before that occurred. But it's clearly lost favor with all the focus on the Conrail integration merger and then the integration. That's where the management attention was being focused. And I think that probably had an impact on the development of this technology. It lost favor.
Well, would you agree it would be nice for somebody to be hired to come in and say, okay, so why'd you shut this down, CP? You were the last holder of the intellectual property. Why'd you shut it down?
Well,
would you mind? And then what could we do differently that would have changed that outcome?
Well, that certainly would be an interesting academic exercise. CP probably has their own internal decision process as to why they made that decision. It would be interesting to know what that was. But I wasn't even aware that Iron Highway was being used consistently. I thought it was retired, years ago. So I'm impressed that it was actually utilized till the last couple of years.
Rudy, are we back to you now?
If no one else, anything else, then yeah. I guess.
Well,
so.
let me just say this before people log off. Look, I'm on LinkedIn, and my email is or my phone number is there. You got a real issue, send me an email or post something on as a question on LinkedIn that I get it. And I'll try to give you, at least I'll try to respond. And if there's a real interest, we can have a phone conversation or whatever. But go ahead, Rudy.
All right. So I got 2 questions for you, and I probably got more. I'll send you offline here. But The first one is, you mentioned in one of your really early slides there, the proposed chassis and N&W purchases, in the final system plan. Obviously, the N&W rejected, their purchase very early on, but the chassis negotiations continued all the way up into early 1976. They were supposed to purchase a big chunk of the Erie Lackawanna, almost the entire Reading, and a chunk of the CNJ in New Jersey to access the Port of Newark and stuff like that. This is kind of a hypothetical, but I imagine it was considered at some point. You talked about the erosion of, Conrail, through the 1980s. How do you think the chassis purchase would have impacted that? Obviously, it would have accelerated it to some degree, putting, CSX, theoretically in a better position in the 80s. How do you think that would have impacted the erosion of Conrail throughout the 80s, having chassis as a direct competitor versus the D&H?
I've been caught by something I do myself. You basically switched the question, turned the question entirely around on me. And now I'm kind of stumbling to say, I think it could have, but that would probably occasion you and I having a cup of coffee in someplace for about 2 hours and talking about it. I'm not sure that I can, quickly run through my mind the various webs that would have occurred over time. I do know that one of Conrail's biggest headaches was dealing with the southern tier, which was the Erie Lackawanna route. We never figured out how to use that. And even today, I still think Norfolk Southern finds it it's an interesting entrance into New York, but most of their New York market entries comes down over the old PRR route and then up over the Reading line into northern New York from the south end. So, there are some interesting things that would have changed Conrail history and Conrail focus and changed the way we were spending rehab money, but the real question is, how robust would have CSX have been as an entrance in those key markets? One of the markets they had to pick up as part of the deal was the Delmarva Peninsula. I was just out on the Delmarva Peninsula, and trust me, all the rehab that went into work to rehab the Delmarva main line, a lot of that is it's kind of gotten a lot of weeds over it. So it didn't work out. So in order for CSX to do this as a package deal, it would have probably had to be doing floating over at the Norfolk. There's a lot of complexity, and I'd have to go back and actually look in detail at what it was supposed to do, what the lines. So I don't know how to answer the question accurately, and I don't want to waste time with hypothecating.
So the second question is one that's a little more direct and probably something you can answer directly. Obviously, Conrail undertook a series of line sales to regionals and short lines in the early to mid 90s.
Yes.
And you mentioned some of the strategic planning surrounding that era, but I didn't see anything on that. There was the Conrail Express program that kind of didn't fully take off, but obviously resulted in some line sales to like I said, short lines and regionals. How did that fit into Conrail's overall strategic plan, in that time period, maybe 1990 to 95 or so?
Well, I was in charge of not only the subsidy operation, but the folks that I mentioned before earlier were also working with me, and we did all the branch line accounting to start looking at what lines should we abandon or rationalize. But then I dropped out of that between 1981 and my end of my career. So the only time I came back in to address this question is we set up a computer program, a guy named Win Akeley. I'm not sure where Win is these days. I don't think he was with Conrail for more than 4 or 5 years. But he and I did some programming work, and we had another guy from our finance group, Al Braverman, who I networked with. And the three of us kind of looked at the moving blocks of data that were available to us on the mainframe computer. We had these old remote terminals, and we started setting up these areas, and it was all unofficial and done at a strategical, not a tactical this is what we're going to do level. And so one of the things we started to identify by 1988, 86 era was we saw that there was a diminution of the need for railroad carload service and traffic density into and out of New England, east of the Selkirk Yard, Albany area. And we actually floated at unofficial levels the idea to the marketing, operating, and the strategic officers, planning officers, the idea that now spinning off New England might be a good strategy because there are certain economics that can occur when you have a short line railroad that picks that up. Typically, a short line operator can order of magnitude have a 25% lower operating cost than the income statement operating costs for Class 1 railroad. There are a number of reasons, which I'm sure we all understand behind that. There was also a need for rehab, and it's easier for a local or managed rehab company, a local base company, to get participation by the shippers and the state governments rather than if you're headquartered in remote Philadelphia, and that's the reality. So we thought this might be a good strategic move. And that was then turned over to other folks at the Conrail area. I think they worked basically under Charlie Marshall and some other folks. I don't remember all their names. And they were charged with trying to execute that local Conrail regional spinoff type strategy. So I lost track of it, but I still think that's a good idea. What I like about the short line railroad industry, even today in 2021, is the industry still knows how to sell and maintain contact at the customer eye level and knows how to adapt by doing personalized or customized switching. Class 1s, I don't know a single Class 1 railroad that's good at doing that. I'm sorry. I listened to all the quarterly reports to the investors. They never talk about it at that kind of level. And I don't see any much documentation. So I'm in favor of somehow spinning off at least the selling activity, if not the assets. But nobody's come up with a way to do that that seemed to catch fire yet. But that doesn't mean that it can't be worked out. Did I answer your question?
You did.
Okay.
I will reach out to you offline. I got some really in the weed stuff for you. I'm doing at this point, I'm basically doing professional research. So I've got some stuff for you to talk about, but it's like I said, very in the weeds here. I just had a conversation with Jim Hagan a couple weeks ago about similar stuff. So, does anybody else have any questions, comments, congratulatory messages from Mr. Blaze?
Howard Smith here. I'll give you one affirmation of L. Stanley Crane going out and picking up assets. I'm a short line guy, and we run the Jackson and Lansing, the JAIL Railroad. And Tom Will was trainmaster up there. L. Stanley Crane came by in the business train looking at the stuff going up to Lansing. And there was the welded rail laying out along what later on became a railroad I was operating. And it's gone, and I paid the price. I spent ties and dollars in rail in there to keep it running. Then you talked about the Michigan tonnage, high truck tonnage allowances when they run through Michigan, going to the various ports. And on the Jackson and Lansing line is the Regional Steel Distribution Center for General Motors. And we tried to run that stuff out of Illinois from the steel plants over the CN, and they still can't get it right.
We need more success stories. You know, maybe what you need to do is you need to re-interview Cal McCavanagh. You gentlemen, ladies, participants, you know, Cal McCavanagh was the only two-time winner of the Golden Freight Car Award. Cal knew how to make the magic work at those levels. And I think one of the great mistakes was that Conrail, for some reason, let him go early. I still am mystified by that. But I think there are solutions out there. I'm not smart enough to know what they all are.
Jim, do you have any color around Norfolk Southern's announcement recently of expedited less than carload service that they're going to try?
Yeah, my first applause. Yeah, I'm like to see that they're going to do. So essentially, you know, that you could take like perishable stuff and you could put it on the tail end of the intermodal trains. Now I have to be careful what I say, so because I have a non-disclosure agreement with somebody who's involved, not with Norfolk Southern, but was involved with a similar thing. So I have to be careful how I say what I'm going to say.
And that's fine. I don't want to get you in trouble or anything.
No,
since this is
no,
being recorded.
but it's a good question. So this is what I want to say. I don't think that's particularly new and only being tried by Norfolk Southern. I applaud that they're going to do it, and I'd like to see how this goes. As a journalist, I'd like to even write about it. But I see that precision scheduled railroading as it's being implemented, particularly out in the West. So let me turn to the BN Santa Fe and the Union Pacific, because I happen to have some more knowledge about that area recently and what's going on there with PSR and priority freight than I do for CSX and NS. Don't ask me why, it's just history, circumstance. One of the railroads is one of those two railroads, and I don't want to name them by name, but just one of those two railroads is rather good at finding ways to run carload service that's priority stuff, let's say refrigerated stuff or mail or something like that, on the intermodal trains. And the intermodal trains are, if you look at the service performance statistics that both those Western railroads report, you can see that under the PSR model, average train speeds have come down. We're talking from, 30, 32 miles an hour for intermodal trains. Some of the intermodal trains are now running 28. And some of the merchandise trains that used to be running 20 are now running 24. So what we see is sort of a movement towards a common mean. We're searching for a new arithmetic mean, which isn't high performance. Now, what's happening is both of those railroads are experimenting with doing exactly what Norfolk Southern said in its announcement. We're putting the priority stuff onto in this case, they were talking about getting back into the parcel service business, I believe, or something like that. Railway Express, I think was the terminology. And so we're gonna run the Railway Express stuff on the back of these trains. Well, I am aware that in the West, there have been efforts to try to do this with certain kinds of priority freights that I don't want to disclose. And the first time you sit down as a customer that wants to use this service, they want to put you on their merchandise trains. We're going to put you on our merchandise train. I always thought that merchandise meant something special, except I looked it up and it doesn't necessarily mean something special. It simply means manifest trains. And it doesn't mean, you're getting preference service. It just means manifest simply means, oh, you're listed. Okay, what does that mean? Oh, you're listed. Okay. Does that mean I get priority or move fast? No, you're just kind of listed. Oh, it's not priority. No, it's not premium. No, that's not. So they want to put you with your speed sensitive commodities. They want to put you on the back of their manifest trains. Well, their manifest trains basically, let's just say we're going to move from Florida to Chicago. Well, the manifest train might get to Chicago in 72 hours. The intermodal train might get there in 42. If do you want to be running on the manifest? No, you like to run on the end of the intermodal train because it's faster. Yeah, but we can't guarantee that there's always going to be room for you on the intermodal train. And if you're not, then you're going to be put on the manifest train. So some days I'm going to get there in 40 some hours. The other days I'm going to get there in 72. Yeah, that's how it's going to work out. Well, there's no sales initiative so far on at least the two Western railroads that I've seen that's consistently saying, no, you're going to be a premium, you're going to pay a premium, slightly premium price for it, and you're willing to do that. We're always going to see that you run on the premium intermodal train. We're not going to stick you on the manifest train occasionally. I don't see that happening. In other words, the execution of PSR hasn't come down to the service level of guaranteeing you certain levels if you're willing to pay for the premium service. Now, can you imagine look, we're all Conrailers. Can you imagine United Parcel Service dealing with us back in our Conrail careers of the 1980s to 1990s and UPS saying, if the APL train makes it from Chicago to northern New Jersey, and it makes it basically in 32 to 36 hours, that's good enough for us. No, they wanted to be there within 26 to 28 hours. And boy, if you didn't get us there in 28 hours, they wanted a rate rebate. I want to know when the Norfolk Southern and the railroads are basically going to deal with their customers under the precision scheduled railroad money by offering that kind of contracted service. Because that's when we'll know it's finally scheduled precisionally. Rest of this PSR is just marketing hype.
Thank you.
Show me the money. That's what I'd like to see. So I haven't seen it yet, but maybe Ennis will show the way. Good. Yeah, I hope so.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. Anybody else have anything else for Mr. Blaze before we move on? Hearing nothing.
Remember,
Thank you very
anything
much,
I
Jim.
said was purely voluntary, off the cuff, and you can't take it to the bank. Sorry. But it was a real privilege to be in front of all you people because I was putting my reputation at risk because you guys are pretty smart.
Oh, thank you, Jim, for taking that risk for us.
You're
So,
welcome.
next up here, you've got our own Mr. Doug Watts. Doug, I understand, is going to give us a presentation on the local area management project and how it related to the Southern Tier that Jim was just talking about.
Thanks for the opportunity to be with the group this afternoon. And Jim Blaze, if you're still on, thanks very much for your presentation. And it was great working with you when we were there together at Conrail. Appreciated your help on the Mexico Auto Parts project that we worked on. So what we have here, folks, is I wanted to talk about the local area management process, which was a program that Conrail implemented in 1997. And basically the discussion about this started in 1996. And as part of my research, what you're looking at here is the presentation. This was given in August of 98 at the Service Design and Planning staff meeting. So basically for the audience that was attending this, it wasn't going to be a lot of pictures. So there's a couple of diagrams in here. But interestingly enough, as part of my research on this, I looked back through some of my archives and came up with, now some of you will remember this magazine and the younger members of the team probably won't, but there was a weekly publication used to come out called Traffic World. And the July 13th, 1998 cover story was Conrail after the carve up, will Conrail customers suffer? And a couple of the items in the article here before we get into this slide deck, it talked about congestion, it talked about the booming economy, et cetera. And it said that Conrail's customers chalked up their success to employee pride and the desire to leave a strong legacy. But the railroad attributed it to decentralized local area management known as LAM. So we look at a quote here from John Salmon, who was Conrail's Senior Vice President of Marketing. And in the middle of 96, we asked the question, how can we make the carload business work better? And Mr. Salmon previously had been with Conrail's intermodal service unit before he headed up the commercial side. And in this comment, he pointed out that carload cycle times had been drifting skyward throughout the 1990s. So one of the things that we looked at with the local area management project was helping the operating team understand all of the costs that impacted their operations, and not just being measured on costs such as crews, locomotives, fuel, et cetera. But instead of just looking at it as cost management, let's look at it as a way that we are managing costs and also looking at how can we increase profits. So in particular, the team that I was involved with was on the Albany division. And we had a project with large customer Cargill Salt. And what we tried to do with the LAM project was make sure that we had team members on the different projects that were cross-section of operations and the commercial side of the house. So this particular team that worked on this project, the first gentleman there, the BDA, he was a business development analyst, so he was from our marketing team. The second gentleman, Tom Dorn, he was the regional area manager for the local area management project. Then we had two gentlemen from the operating team, the district superintendent for the southern tier, the train master that reported to him out of Port Jervis. And then the rest of the folks were involved with the local area management team for the division. But all of us, the rest of us that were part of this team, while we were now on the commercial side of the house, we were still involved in operations that had come from the operating side of the house. So what we looked at here was Cargill salt. You see that they moved a substantial volume of industrial salt from New York State up to Vermont. And they were looking for a way to establish a competitive advantage because they wanted to bid on additional traffic. And the Northeast salt market, highly competitive. Rail, truck, barge, all competed head to head. So, you know, if you didn't do things correctly, there was somebody else that was waiting to eat your lunch. So our goals here were to work with the customer on their private fleet. Now, first pass, you look at this and say, well, what do I care as a railroader about private cars? You know, I'm worried about my system cars. I'm worried about foreign cars from other railroads because I'm paying per diem on those. But the important thing here was working with the customer on costs that they had, because if we had cycle times that were poor, that meant they couldn't go after additional traffic, or in order to handle the traffic that they had, they may have to add more cars to their lease fleet. So that's an increase in cost, an increase in expense to the customer. So we wanted to work with the customer on helping them to be more competitive. And in addition to that, maintain or reduce their cost. And in turn, that could result in additional traffic for Conrail. So here was the problem. Existing service, 90-mile move from Ludlowville, New York to Binghamton. Average time, 86 hours. So yep, 3.5 days. And here's what it looked like. Move number one, Ludlowville to Sayre on one local train. Sayre down to Elmira on a second local. Then it gets on a road train, BOI, the Buffalo Frontier to Oak Island train, and goes to Binghamton. Cars get set out there, and then a fourth crew would a fourth local Conrail crew would place the cars on the CP interchange to get them up to Vermont. So my team and I, when we had the opportunity to go out, sit down with the folks on the southern tier, those of you who are listening now or who are former operating folks, you'll remember that there was different programs that came out during our careers at Conrail, and it was sort of like, yeah, okay, what are you telling me now? This is the program of the day. So there was a lot of skepticism about the ability to make these things happen because that's not the way the operating department had been measured. And it was operating department had a set of goals, mechanical department had a set of goals, sales and marketing had a set of goals, and they were all in stovepipes or silos, and they didn't merge. Well, looking through the local area management project, we were able to break some of those silos down, not all of them, but we were able to break some of those down and start working together on how do we make these things happen. So we go from the existing service to this proposal. Work with the customer. They were already doing some blocking. So instead of trying to do this every day, let's do it once a week, pre-block 40 cars, because it was a 40-car move that was going up to Burlington. Make a pickup at Ludlowville by midnight, have the cars in Sayre by 10 the next day. Then we'd have an extra crew would move the cars directly to Binghamton for the interchange to the CP. So this is what that looked like. One crew, Ludlowville to Sayre, second crew from Sayre, not just to Binghamton, but up to the interchange location So we had 2 crews that were doing this, and I think the rough time on that was probably about 12 to 14 hours versus 86. Now, granted, we were doing this once a week, but it was a move that saved a substantial amount of time. And as you'll see here, it allowed the customer to go after additional business. Well, Cargill's happy now because the Burlington salt receiver, they're getting their cars, they're getting the salt 2 days faster. Cargill reduced costs, extended market reach, no investment in additional lease fleet cars. So the result for Cargill was, and Conrail, increased business from Cargill. 280 new car loads annually, $168,000 in revenue. So, you know, in today's dollars, you're looking at that going, no, $168,000, it's not a lot. Well, yeah, it was then. And the other point for Conrail, increased locomotive utilization, because we took the power from one of the locals that would sit until it was ready for the other local the next day. And it was poor utilization of motive power. Well, here we were able to increase that locomotive utilization. And then one of the other things that we looked at a lot was reduction of risk. So instead of 4 crews handling this traffic, now it was only 2 crews. So what we were able to do here is we were asked for our perspective on this, and we basically served as consultants for the operating and commercial groups, sort of as the brokers to bring those folks together. And then this local team effort, you know, Cargill, Albany Division, the Lamb Process, and Conrail were all winners. And it was interesting because the district superintendent, who we made our first initial presentation to about what the local area management project was all about, not even talking about Cargill salt. But when we went out initially, as I called it, preaching the gospel according to Lamb, he looked at us and he rolled, we're sitting in the meeting room, he looked at us and he rolled his eyes up and he goes, yeah, okay, I hear what you guys are saying, but you know, let's figure out a way that we can get a project that I have here and make something happen. So basically, a big part of this was getting buy-in from the operating department. And as I told my team, I think what we need to do is, in order to get the guys buying in on this, we have to help them resolve some issues that they have. And that terminal superintendent did have some things that he wanted to see if we could work with. Since we had a pipeline to corporate, we were able to help him. So in turn, he was able to help us and implement this plan. In addition, there was also a financial incentive on the local area management project, because what happened was each terminal became a business center, and each terminal got a scorecard that was updated on a regular basis. And I remember from the start of this project to going across the Albany division, and once folks started buying in on this and then saw what the financial incentives were for the management team and then for the crews, everybody started competing to see, you know, who could be the best at their bringing in new business, reducing cycle time, etc. And from the very beginning of the project, when my team and I got a lot of resistance in the field to starting to do these projects similar to Cargill Salt in other parts of the division, the word started to spread across the division as well as across the system, because there was other process improvement teams for the Lamb project on other divisions. And then I remember we went up to see the folks in upstate New York, and one of the crews came up to us and took us over to the transportation or the train and engine service sign-up board, and they actually had their scorecard posted so everybody could see it. And they told us when we came in that they said, hey, did you see the latest card? And we hadn't looked at the scorecard yet. They took us over and showed us. So from us showing them to them showing us was quite an accomplishment. The other thing that this did was on this Cargill Salt project in 1997, there was a outfit called Rail Business, and their first annual win-win award for best service between a Class 1 and its shipping partner was won by Conrail for the Cargill Salt project. So it was innovative, it was different. And I remember from my days as a train master, the only things I was being measured on was crew starts or reducing crew starts Of course, service was always important, but it was always like it was a going out of business sale, and how could I reduce cost, and how could I not, have these costs all the time. But then when we got into looking at profitability, how can we attract new business, then it was a whole different measurement exercise and an educational exercise for me as a former train master, and then working with other train masters. Another project that I worked with, fortunately on the LAM initiative, came out of West Springfield, Mass. And this was a situation where we had a terminal superintendent who was looking at, on the Boston line, or affectionately known the B&A, how could he move traffic from West Springfield, and this was merchandise traffic, how could he move that traffic? And also, how could he keep interchange locations on the B&A clear of traffic that our short line partners would bring to us, but because we couldn't move the traffic, they hit us with reclaim. So there was a negative impact on that. Trains that originated at Boston or Framingham, by the time they got to him at West Springfield, the trains were oversubscribed. There was no room. So then what we worked with, what had to happen on that division was you had to order an extra train to move that rest of that traffic across the B&A to get it to Selkirk. This terminal superintendent at West Springfield came up with an idea and said, hey, we don't have to have a new train start that runs all the way across the railroad. Is there a way that we could have something that runs part of the way across the Boston and Albany? So what we came up with was a pair of trains, SEPW, PWSE, and that was Selkirk to Providence, and then Providence to Selkirk. Annualized savings after this train went through a 30-day test period, annualized savings was $1.4 million. A lot of folks didn't think that it was going to work, but it did. And interestingly enough, that train pair survived into CSX after the split. Now you'll ask, well, where did that 1.4 million come from? We weren't calling extra crews. The Blue Room was happy because power was balanced again. Reclaims went down with two of our short line partners because now the interchange locations were fluid again. They could pick up cars that they were getting from us. They could give us cars. Traffic was moving across the B&A. A lot of people were happy about this, and that all came out of the local area management project. And again, breaking down silos, trying to do things creatively and trying to do things a little bit differently than they had been done in the past. So that's my presentation on LAM, and it was a very interesting project. And I'll leave you with this. As we all know, Conrail went away on May 31st of 1999. When you look at when this LAM project was started, discussion started in 1996. It was implemented in 1997. We only had 2 more years. Basically, you could have just said, well, let's put it on cruise control. But the management team decided, no, they didn't want to put it on cruise control. They wanted to continue to do things right up until the end. Whereas the senior vice president of operations said at a LAM presentation, he said, let's shoot the lights out. And that's what we were able to do. Questions, comments?
Hey, Doug, this is John. On the composition of the team that you showed us at the beginning,
Yeah.
Generally, what was the breakdown between commercial guys and operating guys there? I didn't quite follow all that.
Well, you had Ray Burke was a business development analyst. Tom Dorn was also commercial. He was, I forget what part of the commercial organization he had come from, but he was temporarily on the local area management project as the regional area manager.
Okay. So
and the regional area managers had responsibility for day-to-day interface between their commercial counterparts and their operating counterparts. What was happening there the last 2 years of Conrail, John, is there's a lot of projects that weren't going to make it past the end of Conrail. So instead of taking people and laying them off or saying, well, hey, we don't have any use for it anymore, people were moved to other departments where there was projects that were going to continue to the end of Conrail or some of those past the end of Conrail. And Tom was one of those folks. Dan Miklos was another because Dan was on the commercial side. And then Brent, Dave, myself, Bruce Huffnagel, and Dwight, we were on the operating side.
Okay. So was Tom and Dan part of like industrial development, or is this just a whole new department within marketing and sales?
Now, the land project was managed out of Hugh Kiley's shop, out of Service Design and Planning.
Oh, okay.
But the like Ray, Tom, and Dan, they were based on, well, Ray was in Philly, but Tom and Dan, they were based on the division. But they were commercial guys working hand in hand with the operating department.
Okay, I think that's, I asked that because I think that's an important subtlety. That's an important example of what you talked about, how the silos between the commercial and operating folks were broken down, you know, that these were the guys who kind of facilitated the cross conversations between the silos, right?
Correct. Yeah, because on the Albany division, we had Tom Dorn was the regional area manager from Selkirk West. And then from Selkirk East was Tom Egan, who was based in Boston. And then he did the same thing that Tom did on the eastern portion of the B&A.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a similar model, that was a similar model that was across the system at the time. And the reason I got to work with the Albany team, and I was based in Philly, and my two guys, Brent and Dave, they were based in Harrisburg. But we all reported up through Hugh Kiley's department in Philly. What had happened was I had originally started on the Dearborn division LAM team. And as they shifted around some folks there that went back to their original department, that left a vacancy on the Albany team. And so the Albany, or the management in Hugh's department, came to me and said, would you be interested in working with the Albany team? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And they said, well, this is going to be your team. When I was on the Dearborn team, I was part of the team. They said, no, you're going to manage this team. And I thought, oh, okay. So it's sort of like, you know, the deer in the headlights look, but I said, yeah, okay, let me do this. And it turned out to be really good. And I will say this, I've had the opportunity throughout my career to work on a lot of different teams. Some just never got off the ground. Others were okay. But this team with Brent Weiser, Dave Mulholland, and myself, that is without a doubt the best team I ever worked on. And we attributed part of our success to listening to one another, respecting one another. And we all said we're going to check our egos at the door, because all three of us had, you know, strong type A's, but we checked our egos at the door. And then we worked on this mission collectively. And they initially came out of the mechanical department and then had the opportunity to move over to service design and planning because of their understanding of process improvement and a lot of the different software that was available at the time for process mapping. And that's what we were able to do. And it was a great team. I really, really enjoyed working with those guys for those 2 years. We traveled a lot. We were away from home a lot, but we worked hard, long hours, but we had a good time.
So what did each division have one LAM team?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Doug, this is a fascinating presentation on I thought, a very important subject. And going back as an outsider, but somebody who was paying close attention to railroad management, and especially Conrail from the academic vantage point, a colleague of mine and I were back around just before 1998. We became intrigued and we wanted to try to follow and document some of this as it was unfolding on Conrail. And unfortunately, then the split occurred, the bidding war, the split. And I think that one very disappointing result of that whole episode was the fact that the LAM process was not really picked up by either the Norfolk Southern or the CSXT, or for that matter, if there were any people who were aware of it on any of the other class ones, they were unaware of it or saw no virtue in it if they even knew about it or understood it. So I just wanted to offer that comment. I thought if Conrail had gone on independently, I think you would have had an opportunity to accomplish an awful lot. And around the edges, maybe relative to the total amount of revenue. It might have been, I think, more than just a rounding error.
Yeah, John, I appreciate that. It definitely was interesting and it definitely was different. And like I said, when we started on our journey, I mean, we're all jazzed up because we've got the program and we're talking about this and we understand the scorecards and all this kind of jazz. But then taking that out and then getting out in the real world, in the field, was a different story. And it's funny because my two guys, Brent and Dave, they were based in Harrisburg. So whenever we went out to see a new terminal anywhere on the Albany division, and we would do our introductions and then talk about our experience real quick, and then the other folks would do the same, my guys always set me up because they'd say, we're from Harrisburg, he's from Philadelphia. So of course, we knew Philadelphia was corporate headquarters. So anytime you're out in the field and you're from corporate, people go, oh man, it's this guy from Philly. So they always set that up, but that was always our internal joke, and it went very well. I mean, it allowed us to kind of break the ice with folks. But yeah, your point's well taken that this was a different way of doing things, and it was interesting looking at this article in Traffic World because the Norfolk Southern talked about LAM, CSX talked about LAM, but Norfolk Southern said that they couldn't implement it directly because it wasn't compatible with their accounting and information systems. And the NS territory is larger than the Conrail territory we'll be operating. It would take much more time to adapt Conrail system to NS than to expand the NS system to cover Conrail. So, there you go.
Classic case of inflexibility of thinking and a drought of creativity.
Right. Exactly. Unfortunately.
Well, guys, thank you, Doug, very much. Does anyone else have any other questions for Doug?
I'd just like to encourage Doug to consider putting together an article on this subject. I think for those of us interested in management processes in the railroad industry, and it's not only historical, but the question is, does some of this is historical, but does it have contemporary relevance? I'd just like to throw that out for some thinking here, Doug, on your part. Of course, it would mean labor for you.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'll take that under consideration, John.
Doug, I know a quarterly editor that would be interested in seeing it, so.
No pressure, right?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, you and I will talk, Rudy. I appreciate that. Thank you, John. Thanks, everybody.
All right, Brock, so back to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of wrap things up and of course, thank Jim and Doug for their time and their expertise on what they talked about. It's always amazing to see the thought process behind a lot of what we saw in the public view of why decisions were made or where the thought process was behind that. It's always great to see a peek behind the curtain at what was going on behind the scenes. And that's the kind of stuff that doing things like this, we all get to learn, but at the same time, it's saved for history and it's not lost to time. So we appreciate your time and working with that. And Doug, also, thank you for putting together a lot of the presentations we've had throughout this past year for the quarterly meetings and getting those lined up. We appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So just to wrap things up, hopefully we'll be getting news out, I'd say maybe in the next 5-6 weeks on a possible location and what that situation will be for the fourth quarter meeting. We'll see how all of that pans out. And, as we have our board meeting here coming up in early August, please email me your thoughts, your views on the society. I want to know what you're thinking about in regards to the future. That helps me to lead. It helps me to possibly see another idea or another viewpoint that will help us move and continue to move well into the future. Certainly, we have some amazing things on the cusp of happening with the museum, the speeder coming in, and we've just finished up some great preservation projects in getting the flexi flow to Danville and so forth. So thank you all for your time this afternoon. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Rudy, for kind of being our master of ceremonies and guiding us through today. And have a Conrail quality day, and have a good weekend, and we'll hope to see you soon. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was
Take care,
fantastic.
everybody.